The day was meant to be filled with happiness, prayers, and festivity. Yet when a woman entered the center of the crowd holding a Bible in one hand and a lighter in the other, what happened next stunned an entire city deeply. It was December 8th in El Paso, Texas. As the sun rose above the Franklin Mountains, the area around St. Joseph's Cathedral began to come alive. This was the feast of the Immaculate Conception, one of the most revered days for Catholics, especially within immigrant communities. For many, it went beyond simply honoring the Virgin Mary. It represented a bond connecting different generations. From grandmothers who recalled crossing the border on foot, to small children who were just learning to say Maria. The scent of tamales and sweet bread filled the air while families wrapped in vibrant shawls and fresh church attire gathered in the plaza. Young girls dressed as angels, their wings sparkling in the soft morning light, laughed as they posed for pictures near informal altars adorned with candles, flowers, and framed images of the Blessed Virgin. Nearby, a group of teenagers fine-tuned their guitars and violins, getting ready to perform lasanas during the procession. From the towering sandstone bell tower of the church, bells tolled, their sacred sound resonating throughout the city like a rhythmic pulse of faith. In the midst of the crowd stood Grandma Isabel Ruiz, aged 82, tightly holding her rosary with hands marked by age and piety. She had walked 3 blocks with her walker, resolute in her intention to offer the white lilies She grew up with a mother who never left her side, she confided to a volunteer. Nearby stood Michael Torres, a construction worker aged 41, who had just finished a night shift without any rest. He gripped his daughter's hand as firmly as he held on to his conviction that the Virgin had saved him when a steel beam almost crashed onto his head. Children ran beneath colorful banners and arches made of balloons. Older people prayed quietly beside the statue of Our Lady. For several hours, it felt as though nothing in the world could go wrong. Yet just outside the gates of this celebration, a woman parked her car and stepped out alone. She carried no flowers. She had not come to pray. Her name was Megan Davis. To most attendees, she remained a stranger. However, to thousands online, she was recognized as Pastor Megan, the voice behind a popular podcast series called Truth Over Tradition. Her manner was direct, her words raw and unfiltered. She had created a movement focused on opposing what she named spiritual idolatry. In her view, nothing represented this more than the Virgin Mary. As the procession readied to start, Megan moved silently through the increasing crowd. She wore no cross, no veil, only a black coat, dark jeans, and boots that made faint sounds on the old cobblestones. Inside her bag, 2 items leaned together: a well-used Bible marked by 20 years of sermons and a silver lighter that had never been lit. Though no one noticed her presence, she was ready for what was to come. No one had noticed her yet, but the atmosphere shifted the moment Grandma Isabel Ruiz entered the plaza. There was a sensation that someone had arrived not to celebrate, but to face the very essence of this tradition head-on. Within less than an hour, everything was set to transform. Curious to know the full story? Stick around, because what happened next was not merely a public disturbance, but the revealing of a wounded spirit and the extraordinary event that followed. From afar, Megan Davis appeared to be just another woman passing through the town. In her mid-40s, with a defined jawline and reddish hair tied back in a simple ponytail, she wore no jewelry or makeup, showing no signs of joining a festivity. Yet her walk was purposeful, controlled almost to a fault, signaling that this was far from a casual visit. What was unknown to anyone in El Paso that morning was that Megan was neither a tourist nor a seeker, but a pastor, carrying a heavy burden from her past. A decade earlier, Megan Davis had been an emerging figure in evangelical circles. Originally a youth counselor from Baton Rouge, she moved to Austin, Texas, where she founded the Living Word Revival Church in a borrowed school gym. In just 3 years, she preached to more than 500 weekly attendees while streaming sermons nationwide. Megan avoided flashy effects, unlike the large churches in Dallas, but possessed a powerful, almost overwhelming passion for her faith. This intense devotion set her apart and drew people in like no spectacle ever could. Her charisma was powerful and unpredictable. Her voice could shift from gentle whispers filled with kindness to roaring pronouncements of judgment, all in a single breath. When she spoke about Mary, the Virgin Mother worshipped by Catholics worldwide, her tone turned cold and sharp. "You pray to statues. You follow a woman who is not the Savior. You bow down to a mother and neglect the Son," she declared. For years, her sermons became the most popular and most disputed segments on her podcasts. Some praised her courage, while others saw bitterness in her words. Very few understood the deep root of her resentment toward the Virgin. Only a select few in her closest circle knew about Michael, her only child, whom she had at 19 and raised alone after his father left. He was baptized beneath a wooden cross that her father had painstakingly carved by hand. Michael meant everything to her. He was why she embraced Christianity, why she turned her life around, why she believed in divine protection. Until the tragedy. It occurred on a rainy Tuesday morning just after dawn on Interstate 35. A drunk driver ignored a red light. Michael had no chance. Megan stopped delivering sermons for 6 months, and when she returned, a transformation had taken place. The messages of healing and mercy were replaced by a fierce rage. She became consumed with the belief that she had been deceived, that the solace she once found in praying to the Mother of Sorrows was nothing but a spiritual betrayal. She began exploring unconventional theology, beliefs that completely rejected the worship of Mary. She took apart every Catholic artifact in her house. She erased old pictures of herself and Michael standing next to statues of the Blessed Mother. She severed ties with longtime friends who still referred to Mary as Mother. Soon she started hearing a voice, not just figuratively but literally. At first, during sleep, then while praying, and finally at random moments throughout the day. It whispered that her son had died because of idol worship, that she had misplaced her faith, and the only way to set things right was to reveal the truth to the world. Her church community grew uneasy. So did her assistant pastors. Whenever someone tried to intervene, she replied with a tight smile and the same phrase, "I am going on retreat. I must spend time with the Lord." In fact, Megan had packed a single suitcase and left Austin in the dead of night. She turned off her phone, wrote no letters, left no contact information, and drove southwest, crossing 400 miles of empty West Texas plains, through dry desert areas dotted with gas stations and abandoned churches, past towns where faded signs still said, "Jesus saves," in peeling paint, and places where she had once held revival meetings. Throughout her journey, the voice inside her whispered like a lit match ready to ignite. El Paso. A feast day, a Catholic gathering, a perfect moment to make a bold statement. By the moment Megan reached the boundaries of the city, she had found inner calm regarding her intentions. Resting in the passenger seat was a leather-covered Bible, aged and filled with highlighted passages and scribbled annotations collected over many years, alongside a brand-new silver lighter, still sealed in its original wrapping. She was convinced that her forthcoming actions were not insanity, but a form of submission. As the crowd assembled and melodies floated through the chilly morning air, Megan stood quietly at the edge of the plaza, remaining unnoticed for the time being. Yet the tempest she harbored within was only seconds away from erupting. When it finally broke free, nobody present in that square, whether young or old, clergy or worshipper, would ever erase the name Megan Davis from their memory. She left no message, not for her congregation, not for the assistant pastor, nor for her sister who resided a few blocks away in Austin. The sole sound in the pre-dawn quiet was the rolling of a suitcase along concrete steps accompanied by the hollow thud of a front door closing behind her, a door that would stay shut for many weeks. Megan Davis vanished without revealing a destination. She shut down her church's website, discontinued the live streaming, and erased every forthcoming sermon from the schedule. Her final social media update was a Bible verse from Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 7, highlighting a period to be silent and a period to speak. However, She did not reveal that the moment to ignite had arrived. Her vehicle, a black Chevrolet Traverse from 2016 with darkened windows and a rosary cracked and tucked away in the glove compartment from bygone times, remained behind. She headed westward, breaking through the early morning quiet of Austin's suburbs and entering the vast emptiness of West Texas. No radio, no podcasts, just the wind and the voice. It did not shout or yell, it spoke softly. You are summoned to purify what has been tainted. You have been chosen. The people need to witness. By noon, she was driving through San Angelo, barely noticing the historic mission-style churches scattered along the horizon. Her stops for fuel were automatic. Pump gas, restroom, no interaction with anyone. In a dusty little town, she passed a Catholic bookstore. Displayed in the window was a statue of the Virgin Mary, hands folded in prayer. Megan's hold on the steering wheel grew tighter. How many more souls would be lost because of her? The voice grew louder now, more powerful. By the second day, Megan's eyes were bloodshot from a lack of sleep. Motel beds offered no comfort. Nightmares pursued her into the night, all featuring the same haunting vision. Michael, her son, extending his hand to her from a field engulfed in flames. And always behind him, the calm face of the Virgin Mary, watching quietly. On the third morning, Megan crossed into El Paso County. As the Franklin Mountains came into view, so did the first signs for the feast day celebration. The downtown procession was scheduled to begin at 8 o'clock in the morning. Posters hung from lampposts adorned with images of the Virgin Mary, encircled by roses and golden light. Entire blocks had been transformed overnight. Sidewalk vendors were already arranging tables filled with candles, scapulars, and prayer cards. The town was getting ready for a joyous occasion. Meanwhile, Megan was preparing for something very different. She pulled into a modest roadside motel near the town's edge, a place known as La Paloma Inn, where the flickering fluorescent vacancy sign barely held on like a faint whisper. She paid with cash. No identification required. Once inside the room, she carefully emptied her duffel bag, arranging the items with deliberate calm. There was the Bible she had carried for 20 years, its leather cover worn and soft, marked with faded sticky notes. Alongside it lay a small red notebook filled with handwritten scriptures. Some lines heavily crossed out, a shiny lighter made of polished silver, purchased at a hardware store in the next town, rested nearby. There was also a slightly torn photograph of Michael, its edges curled, showing him, at around 10 years old, smiling next to a statue of the Virgin Mary during a school church trip. Megan gazed at the picture for a long silence before turning it over face down. While El Paso lay asleep under a blanket of stars and candle-lit vigils silently began at churches across the city, Megan knelt beside the motel bed. She did not bow her head in prayer, but instead rehearsed what she planned to do. She would enter the square at around 7:15 in the morning. She would wait patiently until the music started playing, until the parade reached its climax. Then she would raise her voice above the blare of trumpets. She intended to set fire to the Bible not out of spite, but as a symbolic act, a sacrifice, a message. To her, this was not about revenge, but about prophecy. As the city stirred and embraced its day of faith and festivity, Megan Davis stepped into the breaking light of dawn, not as someone adrift, but as someone with purpose. A mother did not appear as a woman overwhelmed by sorrow, but as someone unwaveringly certain that her forthcoming act was not one of destruction, but of revelation. At exactly 7:26 in the morning, the first trumpet shattered the quiet dawn. The mariachi band, positioned near the cathedral steps, began playing lasanas, while flower petals drifted softly from balconies above. Hundreds of voices rose together in song. Children dressed in white robes with golden sashes proceeded in orderly lines, followed by dancers adorned in Aztec costumes whose feathered headpieces sparkled under the awakening sun. The celebration procession was underway. At the heart of this vibrant scene, Father Joseph Alvarez carried a carefully crafted replica of the Virgin Mary made from white oak and painted by a local artist. Behind him, altar servers waved censers that released fragrant clouds of frankincense into the sky. The plaza radiated life. Every corner pulsed with a mix of devotion and happiness. Yet, one figure stood apart, unmoving to the crowd's rhythm. Megan Davis remained near the center of the square, as still as stone, her gaze fixed on the approaching statue, while her hands gripped her Bible so tightly that her knuckles became pale. The silver lighter in her coat pocket felt cold against her side. Just a few steps away, 10-year-old Isabel Martinez danced happily with her cousins, blissfully unaware that her laughter rang out beside an incoming storm. Her grandmother, Grandma Isabel Ruiz, knelt silently behind her, eyes closed, lips moving with the rhythm of the rosary beads slipping through her fingers. The air was warm and filled with the scent of anticipation. Music was on the verge of shifting when, at 7:31 in the morning, Megan stepped forward. Initially, nobody paid attention. With so many people gathered, a slight movement in the crowd seemed unremarkable. A mother adjusting her baby's blanket, a man lifting his phone to capture a moment. But then arose an unexpected sound. "Mary is a lie." Those words echoed sharply and unnaturally, slicing through music and prayer as if a sharp blade passed through delicate silk. The band halted mid-note. Conversation stopped abruptly. Children glanced up. Parents stood frozen. A collective tremor swept through the crowd like a chilly breeze crossing a vast wheat field. Megan raised the Bible above her head. "You have been worshipping an idol. She is not the way. This is idolatry." Gasps and cries erupted. Some assumed it was a joke, others instinctively moved to protect their children. A few started recording. Father Joseph ceased walking. The statue in his arms suddenly grew heavier. His face, shaped by decades of kindness, tightened in a manner rarely seen. Megan opened her Bible with shaking hands, but her trembling was driven by resolve rather than fear. "For 20 years I preached falsehoods. I led people into darkness. No longer." Then she pulled a lighter from her pocket. The silver gleamed in the morning sun. An astonished silence covered the plaza. Thousands held their breath as if time had been suspended. Click. A tiny flame appeared, almost laughable in its smallness at first, just a flicker. Yet once it touched the edges of the worn, yellowed pages, the fire spread swiftly. The book burst into flames. A sharp cry burst from the crowd. Someone yelled, "No, no," and another voice shouted, "Oh my God, what is she doing?" Parents quickly pulled their children behind them. Elderly women let their flowers drop to the ground. Several people rushed toward Megan but halted abruptly, stunned by the determination reflected in her eyes. Grandma Isabel Ruiz openly wept while clutching her rosary beads. "Señor Topad," Father Joseph murmured quietly, "forgive her. She doesn't understand." Yet even he was motionless at first. The shock was overwhelming. Megan gripped the burning Bible like a beacon, rotating slowly so every face could witness. "This is what you have worshipped. Paper, ink, falsehoods." Ash began drifting down like dark snowflakes. The scent of scorched leather and singed pages overpowered the incense lingering in the air. Some shrieked, others wept quietly, while many watched, frozen by the horror of seeing a sacred symbol publicly defiled by one of their own. The flames consumed half the Bible before Megan dropped it onto the cobblestone street. Still aflame, her voice now cracking, strained by emotion, she declared, "This is your warning. Wake up. You have been deceived for centuries." This was not merely a protest. It was a sermon. A fierce and desperate plea from a woman convinced her act was a divine command. The square no longer felt like a celebration. It became a battlefield of faith, and in its center stood a woman ablaze not with fire, but with rage. What no one realized, what no one could ever have guessed, was that this dreadful instant was just the beginning. Beneath that rage, something else began to emerge. A fracture, a shiver, a transformation in Megan Davis's very spirit. The plaza was about to witness not only her collapse, but also her moment of judgment. The Bible kept burning, its pages curling and darkening, the edges glowing like fading coals from a fire long extinguished. Smoke spiraled into the chilly Texas dawn, bringing with it the scent of burnt scripture and something heavier: sorrow. Megan Davis stood amidst it all, her chest rising and falling rapidly, lips trembling, yet her voice had vanished. Not because she had stopped proclaiming, but because she had no words left to offer. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. Then a small, gentle voice broke the stillness from the crowd's edge. "Why is she hurting the Bible, Mama?" A little boy, around 6 or 7, clung tightly to his mother's skirt. Tears gathered in his eyes as he gazed at the ashes on the ground. His mother, Maria Hernandez, drew him close, instinctively protecting him. Just look away, mijo," she murmured, though her own gaze remained fixed on the woman at the storm's center. Nearby, Father Joseph finally stepped forward. He passed the statue of the Virgin Mary to 2 altar servers and began making his way through the crowd. His white robes swayed as he moved, his eyes fixed intently on Megan. His steps were measured, but purposeful. Over his 4 decades of priesthood, he had witnessed countless incidents, demonstrations, destruction, even threats. This moment felt different because as he approached, he didn't merely notice the anger on Megan Davis's face. Instead, he observed a fracture forming beneath her expression. She was trembling now, not out of fury, but due to something else entirely: doubt, exhaustion, remorse. "You're not truly free yet, are you?" he said quietly. That was the reason she still quivered. Megan did not answer. Her eyes swept over the crowd, searching faces that were not filled with hatred as she had anticipated, but with sadness, confusion, and even empathy. Close to the front stood Grandma Isabel Ruiz, an 81-year-old matriarch who had endured multiple waves of religious persecution over her life. Her voice was barely audible, yet those nearby caught her words clearly. "She is not a monster. She is a mother, suffering." And it was true, because beneath all the layers of theology, doctrine, and judgment, beneath the anger and accusations, Megan Davis was still a woman mourning a lost child. The lighter she had held now lay cold and abandoned at her feet. The Bible was reduced to ashes and partly burnt leather. It no longer bore the heaviness of her belief, only the scent of something forever gone. She glanced down at her hands, charred with soot, shaking and empty. Then another voice emerged, but it was not the same as before. This one was not angry or forceful. It was not even from the outside. It came from a memory. Michael's voice, faint and distant like a whisper from a long-forgotten dream. "Why do you always cry when you speak about her, Mom?" She could still sense his tiny fingers brushing her cheek, his purity, his endless questions. Suddenly, her legs gave way. She fell to the cobblestones exactly where the Bible had been consumed by flames. Her body folded, not like a warrior vanquished, but as if a spirit was unraveling. Some onlookers gasped, others retreated, but one woman, Maria Hernandez, the mother from earlier, stepped forward. Holding her son close to her waist, she knelt next to Megan Davis, resting a gentle hand on her back. "You do not have to bear this burden alone anymore," she whispered. Megan did not respond. She was speechless, yet her shoulders trembled. Quiet sobs began to break through years of hardened resolve. Behind them, Father Joseph arrived silently. Words were unnecessary. He knelt down and joined them. 3 individuals, complete strangers at first, were now united by an indescribable human connection. Around them, the crowd stood motionless, observing, bearing witness. What had started as a spiritual defiance was transforming. Not redemption yet, but its first stirrings. A moment when rage softened to sorrow, when unwavering conviction fractured beneath the weight of despair, and when a woman who believed she came to destroy was now silently pleading for a chance to endure. At first, the change was subtle, a barely perceptible breeze. a soft movement in the morning air that stirred the banners hanging above the plaza and sent a scattering of rose petals swirling along the worn stones. Then the aroma arrived. Gentle, faint, unmistakably roses, yet not the sort found at street-corner flower stands. Not those tucked within bouquets or attached to altar decorations. This was different, more intense, warmer, like a memory too flawless to be true. Father Joseph halted mid-prayer. He had been quietly repeating the Hail Mary, uncertain what else to pray. The broken woman had collapsed before him, but when the fragrance touched him, he opened his eyes. The scent instantly transported him back to the morning his mother died. When that very same smell filled her hospital room moments after she whispered her last farewell, he glanced around. No roses blooming near, no vendors passing by. Nothing that could account for it. Next to him, Maria Hernandez took a deep breath. She turned her head, eyes wide, and whispered, "Do you notice that?" Her son nodded silently. He lifted his gaze toward the sky as if sensing someone or something observing them. A few steps away, Grandma Isabel Ruiz, who had stayed seated on her portable chair, gripped the silver crucifix hanging from her neck and began to weep, not from fear or grief, but from reverence. "She is here," the old woman murmured. The plaza responded. More heads turned, more faces lifted. People stopped scrolling on their phones. The atmosphere shifted once again, but this time not with fear, with amazement. Even Megan Davis felt it. Her sobs eased. The crowd's clamor softened. And what followed was extraordinary. What filled the space was not silence, but a dense, quiet presence, heavy and soft like velvet. She raised her head, eyes bloodshot, hands coated in ash, lips cracked from shouting. Yet something shifted in her expression. For the very first time since she arrived, her features softened. "No," she murmured to herself. "That cannot be." Yet the scent did not fade. Instead, it intensified, spreading across the plaza like an invisible incense, weaving through every corner of the square, hovering above the ashes of the burned Bible as if claiming what had been lost. A group of women started to kneel without any instruction. It came naturally, a sign of respect. In the distance, the mariachi band that had abandoned their instruments minutes earlier picked up their violins again, almost without realizing it. One musician, eyes shining, played a single note, then another. It was a Maria, and the sound spread like wildfire, but not the kind Megan had ignited. This fire was one of healing. Somewhere beyond the crowd, a child began to hum along. Then another child joined. Soon the entire plaza, numbering in the thousands, raised their voices in a trembling, spontaneous hymn. Megan gripped her chest. It was not pain. It was not shame. It was something completely different, a warmth growing beneath her ribs, strange yet familiar, as if something buried years ago was awakening. A memory came to her, her son Michael, no older than 4, offering her a flower outside a church after his first communion. "It's for you," he had said, pointing to the statue. "She is his mother, so that makes her ours as well." Tears appeared again, but this time they did not sting. They purified her soul. As the last tones of a Maria drifted skyward, Megan slowly turned and noticed something. A young girl, no older than 7 years, stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. She held out a single red rose to Megan silently. Her expression was serene, her eyes filled with kindness. Megan looked on, trembling. She reached her hand, her fingers just touching the stem. The fragrance overwhelmed her senses, richer now and unmistakably roses, forgiveness and home. At that moment, right in the middle of a plaza she had once promised to defile, Megan Davis fell forward, not collapsing, but surrendering fully. She was unsure if the Virgin Mary had truly appeared that morning, yet one truth became crystal clear. She was no longer alone. The fire burning within her finally grew silent. As Megan knelt in the center of the plaza, holding the red rose in one hand, the surrounding voices merged into a blur. The music dimmed, the crowd turned into shadows. Only the quivering breath inside her chest and the sensation of something shifting deeply remained. She closed her eyes, and suddenly she was no longer in El Paso. She was back in Louisiana, barefoot in her grandma's backyard at the age of 7, kneeling on damp grass while the elderly woman murmured prayers in fragmented English mixed with heavy Spanish. Grandma Isabel Ruiz's hands, like fragile parchment, guided Megan's small fingers into the form of the cross. She said, "This is how you talk to her," she whispered gently. "She always hears you, even when nobody else does." Megan had trusted those words back then, trusted them wholeheartedly. She recalled the small statue of the Virgin Mary resting on the kitchen windowsill, her blue cloak and lowered gaze always guarding a home filled more with quiet than comfort. Her mother was seldom around, her father even less so. Yet her grandmother's belief occupied that emptiness. In those times, the Virgin was not merely a plaster figure. She was the mother Megan had not yet come to realize she longed for. Many years later, after her grandmother passed away and life became tougher, Megan buried that part of herself, forged by a different kind of ordeal, one that replaced softness with certainty and reverence with strict rules. And now, right here amid a Catholic celebration, she had arrived to awaken that lost child within her. She opened her eyes slowly. The rose remained in her grasp. The crowd still encircled her. However, something profound had changed, not in the atmosphere, but in how she perceived it. Every face she had once assessed with judgment now seemed familiar. Maria Hernandez, the mother who had knelt beside her earlier, was holding her son more tightly, but her face no longer carried fear. Instead, it showed protection and empathy. Grandma Beatrice, the elderly lady clutching the worn crucifix, no longer appeared as a symbol of misplaced tradition, but as a woman who had endured and survived. Grandma Isabel Ruiz had faced every possible hardship and still arrived with a folding chair and a whispered prayer. Even Father Joseph, now standing quietly nearby, did not seem like an opponent, but rather a witness, not to her faults, but to her unraveling and transformation. Then Megan Davis's eyes shifted toward the ashes on the ground. What was left of her Bible was merely scorched leather and fragments of text, barely decipherable. The pages she once memorized, the words she once wielded as weapons, were gone but not forgotten. Because in losing what she believed she needed, something authentic entered her life. A woman in her mid-30s, with tear-streaked cheeks and holding a laminated prayer card, stepped forward. "I used to hear your sermons," she said, her voice shaking. "After I lost my baby, your words helped me survive. But today," she hesitated, glancing at the ashes, "you reminded me that even the strongest faith can falter, but it can rise again." Megan Davis found herself speechless. For the first time in many years, she did not have a prepared response. No scripture to quote, no argument to make, just the quiet. Then a voice resurfaced from her past, her own voice from long ago whispering in her mind, "Faith isn't about never doubting. It's about not turning away when the answers frighten you." She had spoken those words before the grief, before the rage, before the flames. Yet somewhere along the journey, she stopped believing them. The rose in her hand shook as she held it close to her heart. For the first time since Michael's funeral, she prayed not from a pulpit or on a stage, but on her knees amid the remnants of her pride. There were no cameras, no prepared words, no theological teachings, just a broken woman softly speaking to a mother she once turned away from. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I believed I was protecting others, but in truth I was only trying to protect myself." The breeze returned, this time warm, enveloping her gently like a soft blanket. Within it, she thought she perceived the faintest whisper, no actual sound, just a profound sense of peace. When Megan opened her eyes once more, the plaza was no longer a place of conflict. Instead, it had become a refuge. The people surrounding her were no longer adversaries, but fellow travelers, all wounded, all seeking, all somehow still clutching the fragile thread of hope. Her transformation was quiet. It did not arrive with dazzling lights or divine visions. It came quietly through a scent, a memory, a red rose, and a moment of surrender, not to guilt, but to restoration. Sometimes grace does not burst through your door. Sometimes it patiently waits within the ashes of everything you once believed had to be destroyed. Megan Davis had finally paused long enough to notice it. The ash had fallen. The final note of a Maria song had faded into silence, replaced by the stillness of something sacred, not staged or rehearsed, but truly alive. Megan Davis stayed on her knees. Around her, the plaza had become a silent witness. No one shouted or jeered, and no one forced her to leave. Instead, they watched, as if guided by an unspoken instinct. She realized that what unfolded was not chaos, but a rebirth. She had arrived with the purpose to erase something, yet what she had consumed in flames unexpectedly granted her freedom. Through the crowd, a gentle wave of movement occurred. It began with Father Joseph, whose white stole was now speckled with ash. He stepped forward and offered his hand, not in blame but in acceptance. "You remain a child of God," he said tenderly to Megan. She remained silent but accepted his hand. Then Grandma Isabel Ruiz, clutching her rosary, moved slowly with stiff knees and a heart full of compassion. She laid a hand on Megan's shoulder and softly uttered in Spanish, "If the Virgin forgave those who crucified her son, what kind of people would we be if we could not forgive you?" Others followed her lead. Maria Hernandez approached clutching her son's hand, who still held the hem of her blouse. Without words, she reached into her bag and retrieved a white prayer cloth. With deliberate care, she knelt down and began to gently wipe away soot from Megan's fingers. "Let us begin here," she said quietly, "one hand at a time." This simple, heartfelt act unlocked something among the onlookers. The group of witnesses gradually transformed into a circle of community. One by one, people kneeled near her. Some prayed, others sang in soft tones, while a few simply stood nearby quietly offering their presence instead of judgment. Even Michael Torres, the elderly vendor who had initially shouted with anger, softened. When the Bible was set aflame, he stepped forward, hat in hand, his face reddened. "I was furious," he confessed, his voice roughened by emotion. "But perhaps fear held me more than anger." He glanced down at Megan. "Fear turns all of us into fools. Yet you stayed." She met his gaze, tears still lingering at the edges of her eyes. "I believed I came here to unmask a lie," she whispered softly. "But maybe the lie belonged to me." There was no applause, no grand opportunity, no theatrical speeches, only healing, slow and authentic, a trust earned over time. It spread softly through the plaza, not as a show but as unity, as if the crowd gathered to honor the Virgin Mary suddenly realized they too were called to embody her, carriers of mercy, patience, and nurturing love. In that exact spot where Megan had anticipated rejection, she instead discovered a reflection of all she had forgotten to trust in, the power of forgiveness, the grace of humility, and the fierce compassion of a community that could have easily turned her away but chose instead to welcome her. By the time the sun rose fully above the rooftops, Megan was standing once more, surrounded and supported. Grandma Beatrice handed her the rosary she had been holding since dawn. "This belonged to my daughter," she explained. "She passed away last year. I believe it's time for someone else to hold it." Megan accepted it with shaking hands, pressed it gently to her lips, and murmured words no one else could hear. And it did not matter, because at that moment no further explanation was necessary. No apology, no set of beliefs, no theological argument could have conveyed more powerfully than the simple, sacred truth visible on every face within that crowd. You belong. Even at your lowest point, even after the destruction, even after the fall, You still belong. As the choir resumed, this time singing Amazing Grace in both English and Spanish, Megan Davis stood in a place she never imagined returning to, not just physically, but spiritually. Home. 3 days later, the ashes had disappeared. A soft winter rain had cleansed the plaza in El Paso, sweeping the remains into storm drains and into the earth where they would transform into something completely new. Yet the memory of that morning lingered on. News traveled fast. A handful of cell phone videos spread online. Some called it a religious breakdown, others described it as a miracle. But no label could fully express the magnitude of what truly took place. Those present witnessed not simply an event, but a woman losing everything and starting anew. Megan Davis quietly left El Paso. No press statements, no farewell speech, just a coat lent by one of the parishioners, a worn rosary in her pocket, and a heart no longer blazing but instead warmed by something fresh. She returned to Austin, not as Pastor Megan, but simply as Megan. The doors of her former church, once decorated with slogans and banners declaring truth above tradition, had remained shut for weeks. Weeds began pushing through the concrete. Flyers on the windows had faded. The building had aged and curled inward, the air inside heavy and stale. The pulpit stood empty. Megan found herself standing in the heart of the sanctuary, fixated on the very spot where she once delivered fierce sermons condemning Mary as a false queen. Yet now, there were no microphones, no stage lights, just complete silence. Within that silence, she discovered something she had not sensed in years: stillness and calm. She did not rush to preach once more, nor broadcast an apology online. Instead, she opened her ears to the community, to the accounts of those she had hurt, to the friends she had alienated for being too devoted to Catholicism, and most importantly, to the gentle and unfamiliar beat of humility. Months slipped by before something unexpected unfolded. She reopened the church, but without any extravagance. No flashy rebranding, no elaborate relaunch, only a simple handwritten notice on the door that read, "Welcome to the Bridge, a sanctuary for the broken, the seekers, and the healed." On the first Sunday, just 12 people arrived, including a Catholic woman named Teresa, whose husband had abandoned the church years earlier due to Megan's influence, a retired Methodist pastor, and a couple of undocumented immigrants simply in need of a warm and quiet place to pray. Megan did not take the pulpit that day. Instead, she joined them in a circle. They refrained from singing loud worship songs. Rather, they lit candles, read scripture, and candidly shared their pain. Over weeks and months, the circle did not expand in number but deepened in connection. What Megan had sought to tear down in El Paso had somehow planted its roots within her. Not ideology or strict belief, but a quiet presence. The kind that does not shout, the kind that humbly kneels. One spring evening, Father Joseph came to visit. They sat together on a bench behind the church. He was the very same man she had once publicly criticized, the same priest who had knelt beside her when no one else dared to. "How is the fire?" he asked with a gentle smile. Megan chuckled softly. "Mostly gone, but the warmth remains." He nodded in understanding. "That is grace." Before departing, he gave her a small item, an old prayer card of the Virgin Mary, worn from years in his wallet. "Keep her close," he said, "not as an idol, but as a symbol of remembrance. She remained when you fled." And so Megan began to pray once more. Not because she had all the solutions, but because she finally accepted living with uncertainty. She did not convert to Catholicism or reject her origins, but she ceased separating what God had always aimed to unite. Now, at the bridge gatherings on Sunday mornings, the atmosphere is calm and peaceful. There are no bright stage lights or sermon countdowns, just people sitting on folding chairs, sharing Bibles, stories, paint, and hope. Occasionally, someone brings flowers, mostly roses. Nobody asks why. One morning, after the meeting, a little girl approached Megan. The child had been silent the entire time, her eyes fixed on the plastic statue of Mary someone had placed near the window. "Is she really his mother?" the girl inquired. Megan knelt down, smiled warmly, and softly replied, "Yes, dear child, and she is always listening." The girl's face lit up then. Grandma Isabel Ruiz handed Megan a drawing she had made showing Mary, with her arms wide open, holding a woman with striking red hair. Megan felt her throat tighten and her hands tremble as she carefully folded the paper. "Thank you," she murmured softly. "I believe that is me." Deep inside Megan Davis, a spark ignited once again. Not the flame of anger, but a softer, more lasting light. It did not consume, but illuminated the way ahead. This is the essence of grace. It does not erase the ashes. Instead, it nurtures new life within them. It transforms brokenness into something sacred. Often, the most powerful lessons are not delivered from stages, but whispered from knees pressed into the earth. If this story moved you, please like the video and subscribe to Touched by Grace for more heartfelt tales of redemption, healing, and the miracles awaiting discovery in everyday moments. Because remarkable encounters often arise from the simplest wounds.